How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com. Hey, guess what? It's .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we're back from Sweden.
Yeah, that was good.
It was really good. Especially the Italian place we had dinner on the last night.
Italian place in Sweden, but yeah,
I know.
It was very nice.
There's lots of great ethnic restaurants all over Sweden.
Oh, yeah.
Stockholm is where we were.
Yeah. We were in Stockholm, yeah. Somebody ordered a bottle of Amarone.
Who was that?
And your night is not going to get worse because you have a bottle of Amarone.
No.
That much I know.
It's amazing. Amazing stuff. All right. Well, anyway, we had a good time. We're back, and Amy is here, and we'll be talking to her in just a minute. But first, we had this little matter of Better Know Framework.
Awesome.
All
right, man, what do you got?
All right. So this is a blog post from a very prolific blogger about Blazor, Gerald Barret. And it's using .NET code from JavaScript using WebAssembly. Now,
okay,
it sounds like it's no big deal, but here's the opening paragraph. Blazor WebAssembly allows you to run a .NET web application in a browser.
Right.
Starting with .NET 7, you can easily run any .NET method from JavaScript without needing the whole Blazor framework.
This is interesting.
Let's see how to run a .NET method from JavaScript. So he tells you how to install the workload, create a new console app, and then he has the properties in the project file, shows you how to create a C# class, and then invoke it from JavaScript.
And he's literally giving you instructions like you're doing it in Notepad, right?
Yeah.
Or at least VS Code, but no dependency on Studio or anything like that.
No Studio.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And so when you compile it, it turns into 819 kilobytes.
Okay. I mean, it's not minuscule, but that's
it's
pretty darn
good.
small. You've got images bigger than that on your web page.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, it's like, 2.5 megabytes for the whole Blazor library to come down. But yeah.
Which feels way bigger than 800K.
Yeah.
Because it is.
So there you go. It's fun. And this guy, Gerald, has lots and lots of good blog posts. And I've referenced them in Blazor Train before. Just a very smart guy. Maybe we should get him on here.
Yeah, we could probably arrange that.
Yeah. That's what I got. What do you got?
I grabbed a comment off of show 1815, which we did back in October last year when I think we were in person. Was that at the NDC Oslo conference? I think it was.
Yeah,
we talked to
so.
Debbie O'Brien about Playwright, the testing web apps. Because we're going to talk about web apps today, so I thought we could talk about testing web apps too. And Dave Parvin says, I have not used Playwright yet, but I have done the older UI testing, and it was painful. Just getting it to consistently find controls was a pain. I'm glad to hear that Playwright might be doing the job better. I don't know when I'll be using Playwright with my current projects because I'm working on desktop applications written in C++ and C#. And I can say that I have a lot of unit tests that are fairly good. And with the help of Verify, they're getting better.
Simon Kropp.
Yeah. The project I'm working on is a huge project, and unit tests were not getting made until halfway through the project. Stop me if you've heard this one, right?
Yeah. Sounds very familiar.
Mm-hmm. At this point, we have over 33,000 tests.
Good Lord.
And it is amazing how often we make a change and a unit test fails because of it. Finding that problem that is in the code we changed is so much more helpful than waiting for a customer to find that problem. It is more fun when we find the failure was in the code that we did not change, but was dependent on code we did change. And with the change we made, it broke the other thing.
A certain quote from Billy Hollis is coming to mind right now. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
I could probably guess. It is amazing how many times the unit tests have pointed to problems that we did not know we had, right? Because you got to imagine this is an old code base that he's got. So he does not understand all of these side effects that are going on. And sometimes it pointed out errors in our assumptions about how a piece of code would be used. And that's good testing, man. Like that's how you own a code base when you've got to take it over and really get comfortable with it, is picking up on all of those things. Testing helps you with that.
You know, I don't know if this has ever happened on any teams that you manage, Richard, but I haven't seen it, but I can envision, you know, when somebody comes in and says, we got to tear all this out and refactor all this and everything's going to change. And the testers go, you can't do that to me. It's like, I've got all these beautiful tests. What are you doing?
But, you know, well, I know I talked about this on the show back in the day, which admittedly is the better part of 10 years ago now. But it's every time with Strange Loop, at least twice, when we did a major update, it trashed the tests, and it was literally easier to start over. And we did each time, and it wasn't until like the third iteration that we finally knew how to write tests that would be more resilient for subsequent revisions. Like it took a while to really write resilient testing for the system as a whole. It's not trivial to do. So Dave, thank you so much for your comment. A copy of Music to Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
And you should definitely follow us on Mastodon. I'm at Carl Franklin at techhub.social.
And I'm Rich Campbell at mastodon.social.
Send us a toot. Rudy toot toot.
No matter how funny it is.
We love toots.
Toots are good.
I love Mastodon. It's cool. There's a lot of cool people there.
Yeah, it's got that small community feel still in it.
It really does, yeah. And it's not polluted by advertising, which I like.
Yeah. I mean, I still worry about its sustainability, but that's always a concern.
Well, at least it's not centralized, you know?
No, and I saw a great conversation on it the other day where a major Mastodon server with 15,000 users was shutting down, like for whatever reason, the guy had to get out, or it's just, you know, he done it inappropriately. And it was trivial for those 15,000 users to migrate they spread out to a bunch of different servers, and all of their history and stuff was kept. And so one person was saying, this is why Mastodon will never succeed. Another guy saying, this is exactly why Mastodon will succeed.
It's like RAID for messaging.
Yeah. It was very interesting.
Yeah. It is cool. All right. Let's bring Amy on. Amy Kapernick wears many hats as a business owner, senior engineer, mentor, and conference addict. She regularly shares her knowledge with her peers and the next generation of developers by mentoring, speaking at and organizing events, as well as mentoring up-and-coming developers within her business. She's been recognized as a Twilio champion and a Microsoft MVP since 2019 and knows how to write a bio with years and dates instead of this many years, that many years. Welcome, Amy. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, every time I hear my bio read out as an introduction, though, it always makes me go, wow, I actually sound like I know what I'm talking about.
You've done some stuff.
I've done some stuff.
Yeah, certainly have.
Yeah.
Yeah, no question. And obviously been busy. We saw each other at NDC London.
Yes.
Which was good fun.
Yes. I'm hoping this year will be a little bit less busy than last year. Last year, just got very busy very quickly.
Yeah. I had this intent to say yes to everything last year and did a lot of things. And this year I wouldn't say yes quite as often. And I am failing.
Last year, my intent was to just ease back into things a little bit, just a practice run. And yeah, it was not much of an ease. It was about as easing as an exponential curve can get.
Not ease. No ease.
Yeah.
All right. You did a talk, and I was paying close attention to it, about this sort of the modern web front end development, because we've gone through a lot of different ways to build web pages over the years. I would argue that just a few years ago, modern front end development meant Angular and SPA.
I think it still means SPA.
Yeah, it definitely does in a lot of circles. There's a lot of conversations about it, but yeah, it's because we know this tech changes so quickly. But often when people are talking about what the modern front end is, as you've already identified, they're talking what frameworks we're using, and they're talking, it's often what shiny flavor of JavaScript are we using today, which we all know changes. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's been 2 new frameworks already so far in this recording.
I mean, I did feel like it cooled off, like it's been Angular, Vue, and React for a while.
Yeah, so there's still, but I think there's less. There's less coming, but there's more coming within those sections. Mm-hmm. So, like, for example, in the React world, the shiny new thing is Remix, I think, unless I've missed the one that's come after that. So there's still a lot of new things coming out. But the problem is they're struggling to keep up with that. And so what my talk and the workshop I run on the same topic is we're actually looking at the fundamentals behind it. So yeah, okay, what are you using React? Are you using Angular? What flavor are you using? But underneath, it's still HTML that you're actually writing it. You've still got HTML as the structure. Whether you write it as JSX or static HTML, it's still going to appear as HTML on a web page. And so making sure that we're spending the time with those fundamentals, because although they haven't changed quite as quickly, there's still a lot of things changing that some people don't realize is browsers are still bringing out new HTML elements and new features to the browser. So keeping up to date with those things, because the way we can do things now is just so much easier. So as part of my talk and as part of my workshop, we actually go through, it's like, okay, well, what are all the things that you would like to do? Like, if you want to have a date picker on your website, how do you do that? And everyone always goes, well, we use a library has one, or we find a package, or my favorite, which is the answer I'm looking for, which is we use a JavaScript package. Right. Which that's then different depending on what you're doing. But there's actually a native HTML date picker.
Yeah, it's pretty good too.
Yeah, it's pretty good. There's a little bit of validation that you can do as well, and it works across multiple devices. So if people are on their phones, it will ping up a mobile-friendly date picker compared to if they're on a desktop.
Now, if we can just get Select to work on a phone, that would be great.
But Select works, but yeah, it's not spectacular. However, there is also not quite an autocomplete, but there is another feature. There's another element called a data list, which gives you some features of an autocomplete so that people can type in and it will select from pre-filled options.
It reminds me of a Windows combo box. Which is
back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day. It's sort of a drop down, but it's also a text box. So you can start typing and then list arrows. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for a lot of what people are doing, that serves the requirements, and it means we've got a whole lot less dependencies. So that's what my current passion in trying to get the message out about is those fundamentals, and reminding people that there are other things that are still changing, and looking up and just working out what they don't know and keeping an eye on what's actually still happening in that area.
I'm grabbing some links like to the native date picker and so forth, and I'm going to W3 Schools by Reflex just because I find them.
I love W3 Schools.
Yeah, they're old school. It's kind of relatable. It's tough. It's totally up to date. And just realizing it's active server pages. I mean, it's
really?
It's not even ASPX. It's ASP.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's cool.
This at the moment I have this sort of thought like the cobbler's children have no shoes.
Yeah, but it works.
It does,
right?
And I bring up that point to say exactly that. It's like, hey, I've got the Telerik set of HTML5 controls, right? The Kendo controls, and it's got a pretty good date picker in it. It's got a selector in it. Like, what's my incentive to change?
Because it depends. So you've had access to that, but if people are using plain React, that doesn't come with it. They've got to have something in there. So that's when people are often reaching for a library or another third-party package. The advantage of the native controls as well is they're a lot more accessible. So browsers don't just chuck this in there. There has been a lot of consultation that's happened with a lot of very smart people. And so accessibility has had a lot of thought already gone into it. Whereas when you grab a third-party package, it may not have had that thought go into it. So when you bring in a native HTML control, people can use it using their keyboards, people can using screen readers, know what's going on. There's a whole lot more of that that's just built in natively. So when people are used to putting a whole lot of ARIA labels and roles and things on there for screen readers to announce, it's just there. You don't have to. It just happens.
Yeah, that's a good point. It reduces the barrier to entry, right? I mean, you don't have to be, I downloaded the repo and, clone the repo but I need this license for this tool and that tool and this tool and that tool. Now I got to go buy developer licenses for those things. Oh, your license, needs to, be renewed, etc. Yeah.
I'm just thinking from an accessibility perspective that maybe that control supports accessibility. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it supports multilingual. Maybe it doesn't. But anything that's native to the browser almost certainly does.
Yeah. And usually it's so the controls or the properties and the interfaces are so fundamental that you can modify them with standard HTML, CSS, JavaScript without too much fanfare.
Yeah, so all of that stuff just makes it so much easier. Part of my fundamentals is we then spend time going back to the CSS fundamentals. So not doing all of the bright and shiny things, but just the overall layouts and stuff. So doing a lot of CSS grid, which I know we talked about last time I was on the show. So I'm not gonna go through that again. But looking at all of the other changes that we've had to CSS that actually make things so much easier to build out overall layouts these days. Like even things, we've got aspect ratio is coming out to browsers. So
good.
That means that we can actually, if we want a picture to be square, we can just tell the browser that, look, this picture should be this wide and it should be square. So
yeah,
those kinds of things.
What year is this? Hey, that's a good idea. Should have thought of that 20 years ago.
Yeah. So a lot of this stuff, and for anybody, I get a lot of people in my workshop when I run them that they've been working on the web for much longer than I have. And so the last time they looked at HTML and CSS, it was so hard to do all of these things.
Yeah.
So that's why they reached all the third party stuff. That's why people are using things like Bootstrap and Tailwind, because they go, well, I tried to do it in CSS and I couldn't get it to work. But the fact that it's changed, and so reminding them or just letting them know that it's changed and these are all the new things, it means they're able to go back. The fundamentals are something that I'm very passionate about in pretty much all areas. If people go, I'm a complete beginner, do I want to learn React? I go, well, you want to learn JavaScript first, and then learn React, because the fundamentals are the backbones of everything that we build. So if you've got good fundamentals, it makes it so much easier when you move up, and it means we're building much higher quality applications.
But aren't the latest versions of Tailwind and Bootstrap also implementing the latest features of CSS?
They are, but it comes down to reducing dependencies and keeping things nice and light. So my goal with teaching more people the fundamentals is not to make everyone front-end developers and to not do front-end developers out of the job. So I've worked with quite a few teams where they have one or two front-end developers, but there's so much stuff that they've got to do. So the rest of the developers, they're able to go through and do stuff with CSS. And so without having to introduce another dependency like Bootstrap or Tailwind, they can have the layout. They can get things kind of sitting on the page where they need to be, so that then when the front-end developers come in, they don't have to go through and clean everything up.
Right.
That structure that's already in there, the foundations of what they're building, that's good to go. So they can go through and do their stuff on top and just make it looking that much nicer. They can add the wow on top of it without having to go through and redo those fundamentals.
Yeah.
So you're less likely to make a mess with the new versions of CSS, even though and allow those front end specialists then to just amp things up a bit.
Yeah, so I'm not saying you're less likely to make a mess. There's still likely messes, but there's just a lot less to go through. So I've worked in projects where the structure's been built out in something else, and I've then got to go through and clean up a whole bunch of classes. And because everything's using that, often the HTML elements haven't been thought out. So I'm going through and replacing a whole bunch of divs with something better. And so there's then a whole lot of cleanup work that I have to do before I can get started.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas, going with just the foundations, there's a lot less cleanup that has to happen.
So one of the things that's always bugged me about JavaScript and CSS is the global nature of objects, classes, functions, whatever, variables. And I know Blazor has got scoping, right? So you've got scoped CSS in Blazor that's sort of built right into the framework. If I have a component named, whatever, mygrid.razor, I can have a file called mygrid.razor.css, and all the CSS classes in there only apply to that. And they do some magic behind the scenes to rename things by prepending the names of the classes with, my grid, whatever. Do other frameworks and even the fundamental CSS and JavaScript, is this happening in other places besides Blazor?
Yes, absolutely. So CSS and JavaScript has had scoping for as long as I've been aware of it.
Oh, wow, cool.
So that was one of the big selling factors was, hey, this is scoped, which means if you change this thing in this massive application that you've got hundreds of developers working on,
right,
it's not likely to bleed out elsewhere. However, there are plenty of other things. So my go-to is typically CSS modules, which still integrates nicely with JavaScript applications and sounds a little bit like how Blazor does it, in that you can create. So for each component, I have a component in whatever it is that I'm using. And then I have, typically a styles.module.css file, and that will then go through and magic the classes so that everything is scoped to that component. So for me, that's what I've found works really well, because the scoping is fantastic when you're working with a lot of other developers, or if you're working on design libraries, you don't know where these things are going to be pulled in. Scoping makes things a lot easier. I've even been doing a whole lot of work. The project I worked on last year, WordPress website, I got CSS modules and scoping working in that. And this was this is fairly easy to be able to integrate in a whole lot of different places. It feels a lot more natural. So some of the CSS in JS libraries that I came across, the problem is they've tried to re-implement CSS. And so there's a whole lot of things that you can't do or don't work the way they do in CSS.
Wow.
Whereas CSS modules is just doing the scoping with CSS. So it's just doing that magic with the class names. So that works really well. It also works really well with things like post CSS, which is really good. Or I do a fair bit of work with SCSS or SAS, because they do a whole lot of magic behind the scenes that makes my job easier. And so that integrates really nicely with that too.
Amy, are you a fan of TypeScript?
I actually only learnt TypeScript last year. A whole lot of JavaScript developers I know were very happy when I finally had to turn around and learn TypeScript.
Well, what do you think?
I definitely see the advantage of it. So again, similar to scoping in CSS, when you're working with a whole lot of developers and you're working in really big code bases, it definitely makes things easier. And there have absolutely been times when I've been working in code bases and I need to I need to pass a value into a component, but I can't remember exactly what the name of the property is.
Oh.
But rather than me having to go and look it up, my computer's gone, you want it's property X that you're trying to define.
Yeah.
So that does definitely make things easier. So for those kinds of code bases and for part of my work, that's definitely made things much easier, which this is a whole lot of people are going to be so excited about me saying that. But for a lot of my work as well, I build websites for small to medium businesses. So I'm dealing in the WordPress side of things, and there's not going to be too many developers.
Lucky you.
Look, that's a whole other discussion that we could have, which I won't have.
Yeah.
But that's another talk that I have. That's actually a brand new talk that I'm going to be giving.
It's real
in
life,
Oslo
right?
later this year.
Customers love WordPress.
Yes, and there's a reason why they love it. But
still the largest web platform in the world.
Yeah.
Yes. But so for a lot of what I do, TypeScript either isn't really applicable. I'm sure I could add TypeScript to WordPress. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. That is not something I want to work out how to do.
Yeah.
But for a lot of my stuff, when I'm building small static websites, so they're not going to change. So building in TypeScript is often just adding another dependency that I don't need.
I like the way you think.
Yeah. And when building from scratch, it does often make things a little bit harder because from the start, I don't necessarily know everything. I don't know what type everything's going to be. I don't know what properties everything is going to be.
Yeah.
So when I'm building from scratch on things, that does make things a little bit harder. So I use it in half of my work, but not so much in the other half.
Mm-hmm. At least you don't have that one right way scenario, like different solutions for different problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've worked with companies that do a one size fits all solution. And in my experience, that never works. Like if you're trying to please everybody, you're going to end up pleasing nobody. So instead, I'm regularly, I put a tweet out the other day. So in the past couple of weeks, I've worked on a Remix project, a Vue project, a WordPress project, and an Astro project. So I'm regularly working across a whole lot of different things.
Yeah.
And because not everything fits the different situations differently.
Right. But do you see some common metaphors? Like, you're multilingual. So, what's the same between all those different stacks?
Well, between all those different stacks, for me, it was getting into the component mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And so particularly the React and Vue space, components is how everything was built out. And that mindset was actually really great to bring across to WordPress because WordPress, it's really easy to have parts of things and pull it in PHP. So I actually found that got a lot easier and my code got a lot cleaner when I started working in those components to be able to pull that stuff in faster.
Interesting.
One thing that I'm starting to see coming across, which I'm now wishing we had in React, was slots. So Vue and Astro and Svelte and a few others, they've got slots. So rather than everything just going into this one spot on the page, you can go, well, everything goes into this one spot, but I'm probably explaining slots really badly. Mm-hmm. But you can go, okay, well, this is also the stuff that goes in the header and this is the stuff that goes in the footer. So that has just been really useful for a whole lot of times. And
yeah, it's an extension of a component model that just everything goes in the right place. I like that.
Yeah. And so I had a bit of a look, and I think there are a couple of people going, oh, actually, we'd like to see this in React somehow.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because fundamentally it is a web component thing, which is relatively agnostic, right? Like that web components is nothing to do with any particular browser or any particular platform.
Yeah. But there's a whole lot of stuff that I'm not delving deep into. So I spend a lot of time working on the front end. I'm sure some of the back-end developers that I work with would find a whole lot of other similarities and differences, and they'd find a whole lot of other stuff that they really love about working in each particular flavor of whatever we're using.
Sure. And I'm going to interrupt for one moment for this very important message.
Hey, Carl and Richard here. As you may have heard, NDC is back offering their incredible in-person conferences around the world, and we'd like to tell you about them.
NDC Oslo will be May 21st through the 25th. Go to ndcoslo.com to register.
NDC Copenhagen is happening August 27th through the 31st. Go to ndccopenhagen.com for more information.
NDC Porto is happening October 16th through the 20th. The early bird discount for NDC Porto ends July 21st. Go to ndcporto.com to register.
And check out the full lineup of conferences at ndcconferences.com.
And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. I'm Richard Campbell. That's Carl Franklin.
Hey.
Talking to our friend Amy Kapernick way over in Perth. Other side of the world. Time is an illusion. Lunchtime doubly the so.
She's looking at me drinking wine for breakfast. Yeah. What's wrong with me?
I was actually just admiring this is the global world that we live in. Although I've started clarifying that I'm the Perth in Western Australia, not the Perth in Tasmania, not the Perth in Canada, not the Perth in Scotland.
Oh, wow. I only knew of one Perth. The Perth, the big one, the way out west Perth.
Yeah, we are the Perth, but I just keep discovering more of them.
Yeah.
So like to just clarify.
Right.
Especially when I'm in the UK where they do know about the Scotland Perth.
So there was an old time comedian in World War II time, Bob Hope. You probably have heard of him, but he always used to do GI tours and stuff. And he would say, "This is Bob here in city," and then some joke that rhymes with the city, Hope. So I remember him saying, "This is Bob here in Perth to bring you mirth, Hope." It's not really funny, but it reminded me of Bob Hope. Yeah. I'm old. So anyway.
No, you'd probably run out of rhymes for things at some point.
Right. Yeah. I love the way Aussies, though, have put the, everything ends with E. Let's have brekkie. What's that? Breakfast? Oh, breakfast. Yeah, brekkie. Yeah.
That is breakfast. However, that is a whole discussion. Some it ends in IE and some it ends, it's double KY. Which I only discovered because I've always spelt it double KY, and I discovered that my sister actually spells it double KIE. So I'm not entirely sure how we've come up with different spellings despite growing up in the same household.
Does that overlap into the tech world? Do you say I'm going to get on a Zoomie?
No,
not so much.
But and none of this explains how they call McDonald's Mackers. Like, where did that?
Oh yeah, I heard that.
It's because we like to shorten everything, so we don't have time to say McDonald's. It's Maccas, or actually, it's come out to be Mackie D's now. Maccas was too long.
I think that might be a Scottish thing, though, right? Remember neeps and tatties?
Yeah,
in Scotland, turnips and potatoes, neeps and tatties.
Yeah. All of the slang is good fun.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Let's dive back into the topic. I did mention Playwright at the top of the show. How are you approaching web testing?
So I spend a lot of time focusing on testing from a front end, in case people haven't already worked out that I like to always bring things back to the front end. Not that testing the back end isn't important, but there's a whole lot of people very passionate and talking a lot about that. So I like to make sure that the front end gets talked a little bit about as well. So probably seeing as you've mentioned Playwright, I have been switching over to using Playwright. I was previously using Cypress, but I switched to using Playwright actually after speaking with Debbie in Oslo last year.
She has been a great evangelist for it.
Yes. Well, she told me it would be easier, and she did not like.
Okay.
That was basically the only. I think the reason why she's a good evangelist is because it's a really easy sell. You just say it's easier to use, and we go, yeah, okay, I'm on board. So that is what I've been using. So I use Playwright for UI testing. So checking, does the menu exist? Can you click on things? Can you go here? Do these things? are these things on the page and visible where I expect them to be? Can this form be filled out? Can I do this? So making sure that people can still use the interface the way that you expect them to.
They're expecting to.
Yeah.
And how, I mean, always the question is, all testing has this problem, but I found web testing has it worse, that any changes to a site break a lot of tests.
Yeah. So UI testing is fairly relaxed. We're not actually caring too much about where things are. It's just that they are visible on the page and that they can be interacted with. Mm-hmm. So that, look, if you're breaking that, then you've probably broken something. So those kinds of things are a bit more relaxed. Some of the other testing I do though is visual regression testing, which is it's kind of like a Git diff, but for visual. So they take a screenshot of what it looks like, and then you make a code change, and they take a screenshot, and they compare pixel for pixel.
Right.
And that one is a lot more likely to fail tests whenever you make a code change, because they're comparing pixel for pixel. There's so many things. Like sometimes an image might not have loaded in as well. If content has changed, it will fail. There's so many other things. And so that one is a lot fussier about what has actually happened than UI testing. So they both serve different purposes. So when I teach it, I sort of go, we've got visual regression testing. And for a lot of big companies, this is what they're doing because they need to know that everything is pixel perfect. They need to know that everything still sits where it should do. Whereas then UI testing suits a lot more people. They go, I don't actually really need to know that the header is still exactly 55 pixels high. I just need to know that it's there and people can click on the stuff in it.
Right. That it's changed or changed or not.
Yeah.
You know, there's two things that come to mind. One, because I've used Verify a bit. Snapshot testing, Simon Kropp's great tool, Verify.
Yeah.
The thing that I quickly learned is, you know, it's not the end of the world when the test breaks. It's just another, it's just another way to develop. It's reactive rather than proactive. And developers don't like reacting because the things we react to are exceptions, you know, bugs. And so the natural predilection is for us to think, oh, that test broke. Oh, I did something wrong or something's wrong, right? But it's just another way to develop. You just change the test, you figure out what you need to exclude, and you're done, and you just move on.
Yeah. And so for doing things like visual regression testing, those tests fail a lot because you go through and you make a change to the CSS and it fails, and it will fail. And you go through and have a look and you go, yes, this is what I expected. I changed that. I know it should look that way. So that one is definitely getting used to doing that. But I've also found that the visual regression testing is really great for like times when I'd be doing code cleanups and just going through and refactoring things. I'm able to be so much more ruthless in going through and clearing a whole lot of things up because then I run the visual regression test regularly. And if it fails, if it tells me that something has changed, then I know that I've deleted code that I was actually using. So that's really useful for being able to go through and do that.
But at the minimum, these failed tests are telling you where to look to see that the changes that have been made were intended.
Right.
Yes. And for a lot of these, so like for visual regression tests, if you're integrating this with your code base, you've probably got tens, if not hundreds of screenshots being taken. So you're not having to go through and check everywhere. We'll go, look, we took 200 screenshots and we compared them, and these 3 are ones that have changed.
Right.
So that definitely makes it much easier.
Yeah.
On top of UI testing and visual regression testing, my other thing that I focus on, which I talk about in my talks and my workshop, is accessibility testing.
Yeah. I mentioned that before.
Yes. This is one of the other things that I'm very passionate about, and just going through and making sure that we're testing things. And the thing is, a lot of, we talk a bit about manual and automated accessibility testing. And a lot of it does have to be done manually. And there is a fair bit of accessibility testing where if you're doing it properly, we still recommend hiring somebody who knows what they're doing. Like screen reader testing, we can go through and play around with screen readers. And I think it's really important for developers to play around with screen readers and to actually understand what people are hearing when they're navigating through an application. But if you've ever seen somebody using a screen reader who uses it every day, they use it very differently to how we use it occasionally. So it's really important to do that properly. However, a lot of people take that with, well, I can't do it properly, therefore I'm not going to do it at all, which is not the case. Every little thing that they do makes a huge difference. And so like running automated tests, there's only so much that they can catch, but a lot of that is literally just linting and validating the code, making sure that you've actually done things. And so that makes a huge difference. And then going through and manually testing things, going through and using it. Can you use it with a keyboard? How does it sound with a screen reader? That kind of thing is actually really useful for us as developers to understand a little bit more about how people are using what it is that we build. We know how we use it. A lot of us are likely using a mouse and a keyboard to navigate through things. But it just helps to understand how people are actually navigating around things and what the effects of how we're building are on other people. Because Microsoft has a really great graphic where they go through and talk about the various different types of people that are affected by whether or not our stuff is accessible, because we often think of permanent impairments. So somebody who's missing a limb, somebody who's blind, somebody who's deaf. But there are permanent, temporary, and situational impairments. So like if you ever tried to join a Zoom call or listen to a video and you're in a really loud place and you can't hear what's going on, that's a situational hearing impairment. A parent who's holding a child, they only have access to one hand, which is a situational motion impairment. So there's a whole lot of other people that are affected, and it's often not until we become one of those people, whether permanent, temporary, or situational impairment, that we realize how much we benefit from it. So I had a friend who had a really bad ear infection and she couldn't hear anything out of one ear for a week or so.
Wow.
And so having captions on things made a huge difference.
Yeah, just no substitute for once in a while using captions or using any of those things and seeing how well they work and don't work.
Yeah.
We did a show last year. It was Courtney Heitman, and specifically got into screen readers extensively with her. And found out several different flavors. You know, it depends on the hardware, and there's only there's sort of a standard set of things you can do, and it's in the W3 standards show pretty clearly this is the reliable part of it. And there are good testing tools that just tell you this will work with a screen reader, this won't.
Yeah. And there's a lot of great tables that people are putting together now, which go through various different approaches to building things, or various different HTML tags. They compare them to all the screen readers and will then do a transcript of what. So if you don't have access to, because I can test on a couple of different screen readers, but then there's a bunch of Mac ones that I can't test on.
Right.
And testing on mobile. And so being able to get these tables where you can actually see, okay, this is how it gets read out in every different screen reader is really useful.
You know, I noticed in Mastodon that, or at least the client that I'm using, and on the web client too, when you post an image, a little thing pops up over the image that says, please describe this image for people who can't see it. And even though that you might describe what's going on in the picture a little bit in your text, oftentimes I find that no, it's not descriptive enough. You have to be pretty explicit about it. But that got me thinking about some of the AI tools and tools that exist out there that can read images in real time and sort of explain them. And I wonder if screen readers are that sophisticated these days so that, when you're browsing a site and it comes across a picture, it could explain in English what is in that picture.
I'm not an expert on this point.
Yeah.
So I don't think it can. However, I could be wrong. A lot of it comes down to, though, because there's been a lot of times when I've gone, it'd be really great if I could just auto-generate a text alternative for this image so that I don't have to go through and write it. But a lot of the time, what those technologies are missing is it's not actually what's in the picture. What is the intent behind why I've added this picture? And a lot of blog posts talk about describing also the emotion behind the picture. Now, they're probably different. Like if you've included a graphic of like a chart or something, there's probably not too much emotion behind a profit and loss chart from the last 12 months. Actually, there might be, but actually the intent and why it's there. So it's not just what's in the picture, it's what's in the picture that you've put it in there for. And so I think until we've got AIs that are able to understand why we've put it there and to interpret the emotion behind the image as well, which I think we all know what happens when computers learn emotion. We're that much closer to the robot uprising. The automated tools definitely help, but for now, nothing can really beat actually sitting down and doing it properly. And so it's one of the things that I do in my workshop is getting people to go through and write alternative text for images and what's the intent behind it? Describe this. How would you describe this image to somebody over the phone?
Right.
And so actually sitting down and going through and writing that description. What is it that they're seeing? And a lot of it comes down to as well, there's been a lot of people that have said that, they come across images where there's no alt text because people go, well, they're decorative. And I've had a chat with a few people and they've said that they'd actually like to know, if people have logos and headers, a lot of people will not add alt text. They just say this is the logo for X company. They actually want to know what this is. People have spent a whole lot of time.
The logo looks like.
Yeah, people have spent time building their logos and how it reflects their company. They actually want to know what it looks like and describe it to somebody. So it really does make, and I'm a little bit bad. I don't always do this myself. I'm trying to get better, but I do often have things flagging at me because I haven't given a text alternative. But yeah, it really does make a difference to go through and actually describe, because if an image, if you don't bother to describe an image for someone who can't see it, then the image probably shouldn't be there in the first place.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, right? That this is all part and parcel of making a real usable website, is recognizing that image may not be helping anyone.
Yeah.
It's an interesting add to all of that. That diversity gives a sort of better spectrum for building something effective.
Yeah.
What else do we need to think about for the modern front end? We've talked about testing. We've talked about accessibility. We've, talked about keeping code as simple as possible.
So probably the last thing, which is mainly tying the testing all together and automating it, because as we've established, if something isn't automated, there's a decent chance that we're not going to do it.
Right.
So going through and running automated testing pipelines, which a lot of people already have in their application. I know you briefly talked about unit testing at the start of the episode, and a lot of them are automated in the CI/CD tools. You've got GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps or all of that other flavors of things are going through and running unit testing. But I've worked on projects where the only way that I could check, I submit a PR for some front-end changes, and the only way that I can actually see what that looks like is to merge it into the main branch and see how that builds out on the front end. So we basically have to go, yes, I'm sure this code is good. Let's merge it in, and then just hope that I haven't broken anything when it comes through.
Yeah.
A lot of it involves actually adding in that automated testing pipeline as well, which a lot of the problem behind that is you need a live URL that you can run these tests on. So you actually need to have a deployed version. You need a website that you can go through and run these tests on. So part of when I teach this is going through and setting up a automated testing pipeline for front-end tests with a live version of the website on GitHub Actions. So we go through, we run, when you submit a PR, it triggers to build what that would look like, and you can get a staging URL, and then going through and running those tests against that staging URL and setting it all up so that only if those tests pass are you allowed to merge the changes in. So the same as a lot of pipelines are already doing for their unit testing, but actually making sure that we're going through and running that. And that staging URL is often the sticker for a lot of projects, is if people's, depending on where people are hosting it and how it's set up, whether or not they're able to build a staging version of it, which there's a lot of products. I use Netlify, which is really amazing. They do what's called a deploy preview. And so, yeah, I can get I think I can pretty much get a unique URL for every single commit I have on my website. So every single code commit has its own version of this is exactly how the website looked at that point in time. And so making sure that we're actually setting that up so that people can test things properly before the code's getting merged in.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't this something that's just built into Azure too, with different slots for app service and things? Do you need a separate tool to really do this well?
Not necessarily. So yeah, it's definitely, the feature's definitely there in a whole lot of places. It's just whether people have actually set that up. And so
learn to use it. Yeah,
people are learning to use it and setting it up. They're just often not thinking about that. People are just used to running things locally on their computer or their focus. And again, a lot of this comes back to people are thinking about the back end tests, but not so much the front end tests. So they haven't sort of had a thought about doing that. So it's just about having a look at how things can be done and getting through and setting them up. And there are a lot of different features we can go through. Azure Static Web Apps has got some really great setting up different versions. There's an AWS, I forget the name of it now. AWS has a really great app hosting product that does a lot of this as well. There's a lot of great options out there.
I just learned that you can deploy a static website in an AWS bucket and get an HTTPS link to it and serve it right out of the bucket, which is probably the cheapest way to serve a website on the planet.
I would combat that with, you can do that on Netlify and it's free.
Okay.
So
yeah, you can't get much cheaper
unless you can find
free.
something cheaper than, unless you can find someone that will pay you for them to host your website.
Sure.
For testing purposes? Yeah, okay. That's something.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you make the point, right? Look, spend a little time, look at a few of these tools and create this equivalent to production environment that's not production. So production is still running while you're really exercising the update to the site.
Wow.
Yeah. And it may not even be looking at these tools, just looking at the tool you've got and is there a way that you can do things? You've probably currently got, I know I've worked with teams where they've got a production and a dev URL. So it's just about setting up other staging URLs. So
something in between those two.
Yeah, something in between, or if you've got automated DNS, whether or not you can set up, or whether you just have a couple of staging domains that you can just flick through which one you're using for if you've got a couple of PRs open. So just going through and probably first looking at the tool you've got, how can you do it there? Then setting it up. And you've already got the build working in that tool as well. So it's just about adding an initial step to there.
we were building sites that were high enough load that performance profiling was important.
Yeah.
Not so much that you had to have the same performance as the last version, but that we had to know.
Yeah.
Because if it was going to need more resources, we could allocate them, but we need to know.
Yeah. And so that's why it's really important to make sure that we're running these things on the same servers where we're running the production website because, yeah, okay, it's great. You can run the website locally on your computer, but that's not the same as running it on the website. No. And we've all heard, it works on Dave's computer. Why isn't it working in production?
Dave.
Yeah.
It's always Dave's fault.
Dave.
Yeah.
Dave.
I don't know. I don't know why Dave always gets called out in my examples.
It's always Dave's fault.
Such a benign name.
It's always Dave's fault. Yeah.
Nobody can be angry.
I know. Dave's just a dude.
Yeah, I've got a blog post as well on how I set up the automated build tests process and then build only if it passes.
Okay.
So if anyone wanted to find a little bit more, so that's running on GitHub Actions too. If anyone
send us that link and we'll put it in the notes.
For sure.
Speaking of links, you mentioned, was it Netlify or Netlify? Because they're two different things.
Netlify.
Got it.
Netlify.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Good. So what's next for you, Amy? What's in your inbox?
A whole bunch of emails because I haven't got to them.
Oh, literally in your inbox.
I'm literally in my inbox, although I'm pretty sure 90% of them are spam. I think there's at least 3 saying I won the lottery or someone died and left me millions of dollars.
Okay. And who's the doggers that just walked in behind you?
That's my dog, Remy. Short for Remus.
Okay.
I think he's decided it's the point in the morning where he wants to go outside, but he can wait for a little bit longer.
Well, we're just about done. So thank you so much.
He can wait.
Yeah. So thank you so much for spending this time with us. And it's always good to talk to you.
Thanks. It was good to chat with you both as well. And I'm sure I will see you in person at some point this year at the various events all over the world.
Probably.
One of those events.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
And we'll talk to you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1. Recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time. Transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a toy boy. Life is hard.